I'd like to thank our sponsors, Blood Moon Box, a monthly subscription box service for period pads and tampons to help support all humans who have a cycle for that time of the month, and no need to run to a store to mix and match period supplies that don't cater to the entire ebbs and flows of your cycle. There are 2 box options based on your cycle, light and medium, and then heavy. And in addition to the period products, you'll also receive PMS herbal teas, a candle, and some other items for your time of the month. You can reserve a box by navigating to bloodmoonbox.com. And bloodmoonbox.com is on a mission to destigmatize the idea of period blood. At Blood Moon Box, they believe that it is the time to honor the enchanting magic within every person who has a cycle. So join us in embracing the magic of your cycle with Blood Moon Box. Hi, my name is Yasmin Tarehi, and this is Gateways to Awakening, where we host one-on-one conversations with leading experts in wellness, well-being, spirituality, and consciousness. Today's episode is with Ben Schick, a seasoned senior executive coach and leadership facilitator with a global reach, catering to CEOs and executive directors, as well as high-profile professionals in the tech industry, including senior product designers, engineers, and marketing directors at companies like Apple and AirBnb. And for 6 years, he was the president of the Strozzi Institute, the originator of embodied leadership and somatic coaching, and has a master's in organizational development. I am so excited to welcome Ben to the show. We recently met a couple months ago at a dinner party of a close friend, and within minutes of talking to him, I just knew that I had to have him on the show. So welcome to the show, Ben.
Thanks. It's lovely to be here with you and talk to you again.
Oh, likewise. So, Ben, to kick it off, can you explain your approach to coaching and, how is it different from some of the other coaching methodologies and practices?
Yeah, it's I find it actually a complicated answer, but I'll try to streamline it. What makes an effective coaching approach are a few things. And I think that I've integrated all of them. First of all, is having some great teachers, and then just going through my own learning journey. But that first, my approach is a methodology. So, and what I mean by that is that there are often techniques that people use for coaching to create openings for people or access. But what I mean by methodology is that it really can take a person through an entire arc of transformation. I'm one way now, I'm being and doing a certain thing now, and I want to be and do something else. And it takes me through it, but not just takes a client through it, but that they then can learn the methodology for themselves. So in essence, at first I'm giving them the fish, but I'm really also training them to fish for themselves and to be on a path of transformation, both personally and professionally. So that's kind of like the first piece of it, that I'm inside of a methodology versus a technique. But the other piece of it is that the essential part of my methodology is somatics, and somatics is a way of learning that is through the body, that basically helps to regulate the nervous system. So it's a lot of coaching, a lot of learning is helping people think about something or have a different context for how they're understanding something, but it doesn't always help them to have access to a new way of being or a new way of doing. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. So can you talk a little bit more about what you mean by somatics? Because, it's something I think not everyone who's listening understands what that word even means and how you use that when it comes to coaching folks. And perhaps you can even walk us through an example.
Sure. Somatics is an approach of learning that happens through the body. It's a way of shifting who we're being and doing. A lot of times we have a tendency just to focus on what we're thinking. And if you focus on the entire body, there's just a lot more information, right? How we're feeling, how our nervous system is responding. And a lot of problems can't be addressed from just thinking alone. So, for instance, have a client now, and very successful senior product designer. And yet, when he is with managers who are above him, he gets really nervous. When he's with a group of people that are more than 5, he gets really anxious. And so talking to him about it and having him understand what's happening and telling him to not do it anymore or focus his attention in a different way didn't stop that behavior, and it didn't stop the anxiety. So we really started to look at what's his nervous system doing? How is he feeling? Can he track what's feeling in his body? Can he become more aware of it in a way such that he could then calm that part of him down by basically using breath and using sensation, which then calmed down his mind and allowed him to behave and communicate in a different way.
I love that. Yeah. I think it's something a lot of folks don't really prioritize, is like what they're feeling in their body and what they know kind of intellectually. And those two things really can't be reconciled. Like you have to kind of do the work of feeling. So I love the concept of somatic coaching on top of your coaching methodology. What about when it comes to creating like real actionable change? How do you inspire people to take that next leap or to take that next step and really shift out of their, I guess, like current reality or current identity?
Yeah, that's a great question. Well, let's talk about what actionable change actually means, which is that I'm a certain way and now I want to be a different way. And I want that to show up most of the time, especially under pressure. Right. So, most of the time we're being who we're being and everything's great. But then when pressure shows up, right, we get dismissed, where we get excluded or we get surprised by something, right? Pressure shows up in the system and then we go back into old ways of behaving. So I would define actionable change as I can actually be and do something in a new way, especially under pressure, at least 80% of the time. So the way that process would normally work is to really have someone get clear and from a felt sense of what is it that they really are longing for, what is it that they want to embody, what's this new way of being. And for some people, just feeling into what is it they want can be difficult in and of itself. So sometimes the focus is, can the person even feel their own longing or desire? Right? So that can often be the first step. Now, let's just say if someone's really clear about which direction they want to go, like, hey, I don't want to show up this way. I don't want to be controlling anymore. Or I want to be able to say no and not keep saying yes and overcommitting. Whatever that thing is, then the next thing is can we imagine what it looks like without it? Right? Can we imagine this new way of being? And that sometimes is a challenge for many people. In many cultures, I know certainly here in the US, imagining and visioning is sometimes pruned out of us at an early age, partly because of our educational system, partly because of the values in our culture. So sometimes a person, like, we have to spend some time going, what does it actually look like? How would it feel to be on the other side of this? And then there's many techniques that we use to have someone be aware of when they're moving towards a new way of being or doing that they want, what gets in the way, right? And neuroscience calls this conditioned tendencies. We all have certain conditioned tendencies, right? Generalized adaptive ways of being that show up under pressure that generally don't work towards what we want, right? They're old coping skills that might have worked when we were kids or younger in life, but now don't give us access to something. I'll give you an example. Working with a CEO, it's her second company, very successful first company, and she's in a very competitive market. And she has a team around her, and they just need to be innovative. They need to be agile, which means that they have to really trust each other so they can share ideas and move quickly. She'll walk into a meeting, and if the team within the first few minutes isn't automatically moving in the way that she wants, or she's not hearing what she wants, her demeanor really changed. the team could feel anger rise in her, and she would just start telling people what to do. Now, that just killed all the innovation in the room, right? People don't, innovation happens through trust. So people stopped wanting to share. People felt protective, right? So she became aware that this was a problem, right? That her company wasn't going to succeed and wasn't going to be able to compete at that level if she didn't change how she was showing up when pressure came her way. So we started to work on first her noticing that she did this. And part of doing that was getting her to notice what was happening in her body and growing her awareness in such a way that she could actually feel her anger and her control rising in real time. Because what we want at the end of the day is we want to actually be able to change the behavior and be a choice in real time. And so that takes, that takes a skill, and neuroscience calls it interoception. And interoception is just the ability to feel inside of ourselves what's happening and be in relationship to it. Are you familiar with the term interoception?
No, I've actually never heard of that, Ben. I'm new to it.
So we have these 5 senses, hearing, seeing, smelling, right? We have these senses in our body to take in data from the external world. And interoception is the mechanism inside of us that tells us when we're hungry, when we're sad, when we're tired. And if we pay attention to it, then we become more aware of what we're feeling and what's happening inside of us. If we ignore it, then we don't read the messages when they come. So, all of us have been in a relationship, whether intimate or a friend, where, there's some conflict that happens, and then we say the thing that we really didn't want to say, right? We do the thing we didn't want to do. We rolled our eyes, or we made that comment that, exacerbated whatever the conflict is. And then maybe it's minutes later or days later that we're like, I wish I didn't say that. But if you grow interoception, or if you grow your ability to actually feel yourself and know what's happening in your own nervous system, then as it starts to arise in yourself, one can do what in our methodology we would call recenter ourselves and make a different choice. So really, said simply, it's really like, can I know what's happening inside of myself? So when I feel it, I can actually recenter and make a different choice that's more aligned with my values.
Yeah, I think that is such a powerful skill set, and navigating, complex situations and conflict, and being the observer as opposed to just like reacting, to a situation is very empowering, and something many of us just don't learn, in our lifetime. So, I think one thing that I remember from our conversation at this dinner was about handling difficult conversations. And I'd love to dive into that specifically. Having difficult conversations feels like an incredibly powerful skill set, especially in the context of work, and especially in the context of relationships, romantic and otherwise, like being able to sit in the difficulties of, these difficult moments. So how do you work with people and teach them how to navigate difficult conversations all around?
Oh boy. Well, did you have any particular thing that you're working on?
Oh my gosh. Well, I feel like it's been a journey.
Sorry. All right. I'll pull that one back. Well, boy, this, I just want to back up and just say, like, so much of coaching at the highest level is really getting people to understand how their own operating system works, right? So as human beings, as Homo sapiens, we have a felt sense of the world, right? Like we feel the world through our senses, and we also experience the world through language. And most of the time I'm teaching my clients to deal with the sensations that they're feeling, what's happening in their nervous system, and also what's happening in language around them. So, I would say the principal issue that we all have is we don't actually know our own operating system very well. But in regards to conversations, one is to just know what conversation you're in. a lot of times I'll be talking to executives, and they're like, I'm talking to somebody and they're not giving me the response that I want. And I'm like, well, did they know the context of the conversation you were in? Did you actually connect with them at the first part of the conversation? So there's just different ways to break down what conversations that we're actually having. And a lot of executives don't have that distinction. The other is for people to understand what's the need they're having going into that conversation. Are they clear about the need they have? And also, do they understand the need of the other person? Right? Because in most conversations where there's conflict, one or two things are happening. Either one is someone is protecting themselves. I'm having a conversation and I'm afraid of conflict, or I'm afraid of what this other person might say or do. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go along to get along, right? Or another way of calling it is called a cordial hypocrisy, right? We're saying yes, we're going along with something when actually we're not in agreement with it, right? We're protecting ourselves, we're hiding. And then the other way is folks will control. And it's really about, I'm right. I'm going to come in, I'm going to tell you I'm right. I'm going to say the fact is, the truth is, this is how it is. And I'm really just blocking out the other person. They're talking, I'm not listening to them. I'm preloading what I'm going to say next. And I would just say those are the two most common ways that people are talking at or with somebody, but they're not actually in relationship to them. And so what I and a lot of my colleagues do, I mean, this is technology that's out there, is we really try to move people to a discovery way of speaking. And a discovery way of speaking is really coming with curiosity, being in relationship with the other person. And hey, I'm like, here's what I need and where I'm going for, but I'm really curious about what you need and where you're going. And it's really the ability to like, can I dignify you? Can I dignify myself? Can I be open and curious? And still, I may not agree with you, but I respect you, right? And I can hold you while I'm holding myself. And in somatics, we would call this blending. Now, I know this sounds super simple, but it really requires that I can feel myself and be centered in myself and dignify myself, while at the same time, I'm really feeling you and dignifying you, and have that be okay. And I know that might sound simple, but if one has something that they really care about or it's important to them, and they're talking to another person, and for whatever reasons of their past or however their nervous system is wired, they don't feel safe, or they feel like they're jeopardizing belonging, or their self-worth is questioned, it can be very difficult. It's very difficult. So, we're really sometimes having to get to the deeper layers of like, hey, what's keeping you from showing up?
Right, right. So what about some like success stories that you could share with us? I know that you worked with a lot of really powerful leaders at Airbnb and other tech giants like Apple. I'm curious, without saying any names, like what are some of the ways that you've seen people really transform through this work and perhaps like make the higher choice? What was it, a practice that they did? Was it just an inner, kind of like their own inner work? Like what really happened?
Well, yes. I mean, yes to both, right? It's there's some level of inner work. Brene Brown talks about vulnerability. Certainly people, whenever you want to embody something new and step into the unknown, there's just vulnerability involved, right? One just has to be open to change and reflect. I'll give the example of the CEO I was just talking about, where she really wanted to change her demeanor in front of her team, right?
Right.
She didn't want to shut her team down. So we did some work over a few months. a lot of somatic work so she could really start to feel herself, get to know herself, really just get into a relationship with her nervous system and her body in a way where she could really know what was happening in her in real time and make a different choice. And she hired someone new about 6 months later, and when they interviewed this person for her feedback, they just said this is one of the warmest, most collaborative leaders that they'd ever met.
Wow.
Right. So in 6 months, this CEO was really able to change her whole way of being with her team, and was able to build trust and really get a flow of ideas going so they could really perform at a high level, which they needed to do. So, that would be one. The gentleman I mentioned, a senior product designer, who just got really anxious in a number of situations. Again, we did some somatic work. We did some breath work. We focused on the way he slept. We gave him a practice, a meditation and breath practice to do in the morning, and gave him actually a very short breathing practice to do in the bathroom if he had to before a meeting. And so what started to happen was he was basically calming his system down. He was reducing cortisol in his body, right? Cortisol is the hormone that regulates stress. And he was able to really calm down. And it only took, I don't know, maybe 4 to 8 weeks, but it really started to shift how he felt. I mean, at one point he was like, oh my God, I can actually feel the muscles in my shoulder and my neck. I've never been able to feel those muscles before. So he started to relax. And then once he knew that if he did his practice, he could relax, then he just started having more confidence, right? Then it just snowballs. And then suddenly he's presenting. He called me one day, excited as could be, right? And these are the best calls to get as a coach, letting me know that he had bumped into the vice president of his division in the hallway and just started chatting him up with something that he had never done, right? I mean, he had this anxiety all the way from elementary school. So it's just a huge transformation. And then, of course, that had other implications in his life. It opened up more intimacy in his partnership. So anyways, that's one of many stories. There's lots of stories like that.
Oh, amazing. I love that. And what do you see are like some of the most common, areas of challenges that your clients face over and over again?
Yeah. I mean, this issue of how to create trust with a team of people, how to have conversations where you're creating trust and including everybody. This is incredibly difficult. One is how do you enter into sensitive or courageous conversations? Because this requires when to be vulnerable, two, really how to practice how to enter into a conversation. So I'll give you an example. Senior director managing a huge team, had a really amazing designer on the team, and she was really struggling. And so we're talking about it. And then I find out that on the sub team that she was on, that she was the only woman with 15 men, right? In the 7 months she had been there. And she was already an introvert. And I said, hey, did you ever ask her how it was for her to be on a team with 15 men? And I would say this company, I wouldn't say it was an extreme bro culture, but there was definitely some bro energy, if you know what I mean. And because we know in our society that those are hard cultures for women and people who often are not, straight white men to be in, just to name it. And so it never dawned on him. It never dawned on him how gender inequity shows up in the workplace. Like, he just didn't have any social context for what it was like to be the other in whatever society or structure you're in, if you follow. So once he became sensitive to that, and once he realized that could really be impacting her, he felt, because he's a very caring man and a really good manager, he felt ashamed, embarrassed. So, we had to kind of get him recentered and moving out of his embarrassment, and how to have that conversation with her. And so we practiced it, and then he had the conversation with her, and the next thing, it just opened up everything for her.
Wow.
Where she could share and say what was in her way and the obstacles. And some of it was her own doing, but some of it was certainly the culture around that he had some control over. And it completely changed her performance within 4 weeks. So, being able to see, there's lots of different factors that influence the people around us. And the more aware we can be of those, and then have the skill to have those conversations, is, I would say that's a good third of a lot of the coaching I do, is how to have conversations that they want to have. I would say another big piece of it is, it's amazing that we as human beings will just live with a complaint or an annoyance for quite some time, and we'll never turn it into a request.
Can you say more about
So I spend a fair amount of that we often don't know that we can make requests and have things be different than they are. Now, obviously I'm working with high performing, very successful people. So clearly they feel entitled to make requests and do lots of things, right? But for each one of us, there are certain blind spots that we have. That we were raised a certain way. We have a certain conditioned tendency about what's possible or not possible for us, or what's safe or not safe for us. And that sometimes we would rather, we just don't ask questions, or we don't make requests, but because we think they'll never be met. And generally those beliefs of a request not being met come from something that's in the past. And what we're doing is we're just bringing the past into the present. And so I get executives to go, hey, this person's running over you, or this person's not being reliable, or this person is simply not competent, and you're not having a conversation about it because you have this belief that nothing can be done, or you have to suffer through it. So a lot of it is just empowering people to get that they can make change in a skillful way.
I love this. It's like giving people a sense of, agency, and being able to make requests in a way that feels compassionate, right? Like without it sounding or going into conflict, I think is really powerful. And then what I also kind of gather from this is that you teach people about self-awareness, right? Like how they're showing up, and also, in the instance of the woman surrounded by all these men, it's interesting if you switch roles with a person, how much more perspective can come in, and the orientation that they might have can inform why or how your connection with them is moving. And so I don't know if that makes sense, but right. I just want to kind of
no. I thought that was beautifully said. I mean, you're just speaking to the heart of what emotional intelligence is, and emotional intelligence is, when I have it's so one of the things that's said to me so often with clients is they're like, "Gosh, I wish someone taught me this in high school," or "Why don't they teach this in college?" And basically, we're talking about emotional intelligence, which is, are you self-aware? Are you aware of who you're being and how you're occurring? Because if you're not self-aware, then guess what? You can't self-regulate.
Right.
You can't shift who you're being and make a different choice, especially when pressure's on. And then the other dimension is, are you socially aware? Are you aware of all the different ways that we as Homo sapiens are impacted? Because if you're not socially aware, then you're going to have a hard time building relationships across a diverse group of people. And let's face it, our work teams, high performance work teams, they're becoming more and more diverse, right? I work with teams where there's people from numerous countries, numerous background, first generation, third generation, all sorts of things, different gender identity, different sexual orientation, the whole 9 yards. And we already know that the more diverse your team is, that often it's going to be higher performing, right? Homogeneous teams are lower performing. But if you're not socially aware of who these people are, then you can't create a safe environment for them. And then their best ideas don't come forth. So, to be a really successful executive, really requires a lot of high EQ.
Right.
Which is the reason why most CEOs have lower GPAs than the other C-level people they're with. They just have higher EQ.
Right. Right. Exactly. It's interesting. I think the tide is turning like massively now, where I think in order to have an effective business, especially with like AI coming online, we can sort of outsource a lot of the left brain intellectual stuff now. And what I think we're really going to need to see is an effectiveness in being able to connect with people, dive deep with them, understand what they're not saying, this emotional, intuitive intelligence. So it's
right.
powerful. Yeah. So I want to understand a little bit more about this concept that you say, the quality of the relationship that we bring to the table at work. Can you share more about what you mean by the quality, like why quality matters?
Well, it's really about, at the end of the day, like we live in a world where we think that if I have something, if I have this money, or if I have this job title, then I get to do all these things, and then I get to be free or fully expressed. But the truth is, it's actually who we're being that dictates what we do, and then inevitably what we have. So the focus is really, who are we being? Are we being somebody who is open and curious and can be centered in what we want, but be actually curious and open to what somebody else might need, and have a conversation where we don't necessarily have to agree, but we can exchange ideas and dignify with each other? Or are we going to hide and be protective? Or are we going to be controlling? Right? So that's what I mean about the quality of relationship is, who are we showing up as? And are we aware of how we're showing up? And then, the other part of it is knowing what conversation we're in. So have a client at a tech company right now, really smart, very good at what he does, but he always rubbed a lot of his teammates the wrong way. Like getting into a conversation, he just felt like he was always about business and always going a little too fast and was just a little too bumpy. And so I was breaking down what he did. And I was, and I said, well, can I give you like a framework? He's like, yeah. And I'm like, why don't you spend the first 5 minutes just being in a relationship? Like have a conversation called, hey, how are you? What's going on? And he was like, okay. He goes, I didn't realize that you could be in a conversation called relationship. I mean, it was hilarious. And I was like, yeah, you can. And I said, and then, after because obviously you're there, what the outcome of the meeting is, can you be in a phase called speculation? Like, let's brainstorm. And I said, and then you can get to a place called, hey, let's converge on like making a decision or what we want. And then let's move into planning. And the light bulb went on for him. He was like, I've never broken those 4 things down together. It's always been one thing. What's the answer? Let's go. And he was like, no wonder everyone's really pissed off at me. I mean, literally, that was his reaction. I mean, he's the most earnest fellow, right? Like there was not a mean bone in his body. He just didn't know. And it was the sweetest thing. And so I'm like, yeah. And he was like so bewildered. His eyes got so big. He goes, let me write that down. And then what would I say in each one of those things? Like he literally needed like training wheels to do it. And then he went about doing it. Now, I'm sure it was like completely robotic and weird, the first few conversations he had. But his colleagues were so grateful, and he immediately got great feedback.
Amazing.
So, here this guy, he's already got a dream job. He won the job lottery. He's working at one of the greatest companies in the world, and he didn't know what conversations he was in. So I just want to say, like, people can get really, really far in their careers, and then at some point, when they want to get to the next level, whether it's the next level of success or they want to have the next level of satisfaction, they're going to hit a wall with either their own self-awareness and self-regulation, or they're going to hit a wall about how skillful they are about the conversations they're having and how they use language. one of my teachers, Richard Strozzi, he would always say, we don't have a body and we don't have language. We are body and we are language. And because that's really how we basically are in the world. And, sometimes when I'm working with teams, I'll say, how many of you have used an app and only used part of the app? And then, like if you're using TikTok or whatever app you're using, you learn to use it enough, but you don't actually know, you probably ignore 80% of its functionality, right? But you use it enough to kind of get you where you need to go. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
And I'm like, that's kind of how we are with our own nervous system and our own operating system. We actually don't understand about 80% of it. And so I feel like, a good coach, helps someone to answer their own questions. Like we lead people, we try not to give them the fish, but we also want them to start to become aware of how they use language and how they're aware of who they're being.
So powerful. Yeah. And it's interesting just the way that we're raised and also, culturally how different it is to communicate with different types of people. This is like, so I'm Middle Eastern and, for example, in Arabic, we speak really loudly. And so when it's translated into English, it can be construed as like aggressive, right? Or loud.
Right.
And probably it's true for like Italians, right? Like a lot of other cultures where they speak loudly. So it's interesting how the cultural pieces need to be reconciled as well at the job. And so it's like, I've always had this question, like, whose burden of responsibility is it to deepen the connection, and I think when you're at work and there's this hierarchy, sometimes it can be confusing. Is it the leader's responsibility? Is it the team's responsibility? Is it a mixture of both? Right. And so I find that to be just fascinating. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, actually, you and I touched on it a little bit in our dinner conversation. I mean, when you're in a public company or you're in most companies and profit and short-term shareholder value is really driving everybody, it's really hard to look at the long term. And a lot of these, a lot of this training and development gets ignored. Like I'm working in some of the most successful companies in the world. And I am shocked at how little training they're giving their people. And I'm also and it's such a drop in the bucket what it would take in time and energy to give them this training and what would be possible if they did.
Right. Right. Yeah. Don't get me started.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
we actually did, right? We started to go down that road.
Oh, no,
but, so I'm just saying that.
I could not agree with you more, Ben. I feel like it's so little of an investment to help so many people deepen their connections, build like long-term success, not just, burning people out. So that we can become efficient. And it's like this concept of like working people in the same way that we built factories in the industrial era. It's just that era is over. And, it's just, it's like, it's nice to see that things have shifted, but there needs to be like a major, kind of moment of reconciliation because people are really struggling and burned out, frankly.
There's things that are good for business. And if innovation and high performance is important to you, then having your people having a lot more emotional intelligence and the ability to regulate themselves and have skillful conversations is definitely going to move them to the next level. For society, to have people who feel themselves, have open hearts, one of the things we say in somatics is the more that you can feel yourself and be aware of yourself, that empathy grows and the awareness of interdependence grows, that those two things naturally emerge with self-awareness and self-regulation. And I think inside of companies, we need more empathy and we certainly need a greater awareness of interdependence. But, clearly that's a thing we're lacking in society right now, in the political landscape.
Right. Yeah. Absolutely. So Ben, you also talk about removing obstacles to kind of powerful expression. Can you share some methods or maybe practices that you use to help your clients achieve this?
Yeah, sure. Well, again, I mean, it kind of goes over to some of the territory we've talked about, but certainly for some folks, um, we know that when people are under stress, they're stressed on some level, that it shuts down executive thinking, right? I'm stressed, I can't think clearly. So it's really understanding, how does stress impact somebody? Where is that stress coming from? And how can we reduce it? So then someone can think more clearly. Now, sometimes we have, we have automatic behavior. So for instance, if you're a person that under certain types of conflict or pressure, you get resigned. Well, when we get resigned, we have a tendency to concave our chest, raise our shoulders, tighten our eyes and our jaw, right? Like there's certain ways that the body constricts. So if we can teach someone to like find their length again, drop their shoulders, soften their eyes and their jaw, and maybe move their breath that's now high on their chest to low in their body, that in and of itself could actually reduce a lot of stress and suddenly give someone access to sort of saying and seeing what they need to do, right? So sometimes it's like really just like it's more than postural, right? But it's really just shifting the way that someone's holding themselves and being. Sometimes it's more complicated than that, right? That if we're used to being resigned in a particular way or combative in a particular way, the body gets into, it's not just like, my shoulders just stiff. It's really like the whole left side of my body, right? There's many different parts of the body. It affects the muscles, the tissues, the hormones. It's like a whole system has to get disorganized so then it can get reorganized and softened in a way. Does that
Yeah.
make
Yeah,
sense?
absolutely.
So there's different ways of breaking up the system. And then of course, with that, the identity of a person and how they're speaking and how they're orienting also has to shift. So there's sort of this dance between language and body that kind of works hand in hand. Amy Cuddy's got one of the most popular TED Talks in history where she just talks about body posture, raising your arms up, like all these different power poses, right? You can practice a power pose before a speech and suddenly it just changes your entire demeanor. So there's just ways of playing with body language that gives people access. And then, and then often it just depends on how many different layers of contraction a person has, right? If someone has a lot of trauma in a particular area that really impacts their expression, then, it's a longer
Right.
piece of work,
Right. Yeah.
and might take some
Yeah, I
different
love that.
approaches.
I love that last comment about contraction and the layers of contraction that some people have and what that means, right, for the work. Because I think that we sort of sometimes label things as binary, like one label or the other, but I think there's actually quite a range and so much nuance, right? Where sometimes one event could be seemingly fine and then another could just like set you off, right? So it's interesting that like refinement, that constant refinement piece. So Ben, we could talk for hours about this, but I want to learn a little bit more about, what surprised you the most looking back on this journey, working with so many clients and helping them express themselves more deeply. I mean, what has surprised you the most? And you could talk about human nature, you could talk about client work, where we're going. I'm just curious what surprised you the most.
Boy, what surprised me? Well, the great thing about coaching is that when you're coaching someone who wants to be coached. I know it might sound funny, but for those of us who coach, one of the first things we have to assess is whether someone's coachable, whether they're supportable. Because if they're not, then you've got to be able to end the relationship, like, you just don't do it for the money. You're there to be of service and to make their job and their life better. So, I get to work with people who want to be coached. There's something that they long for. There's something that they want to get done. And they make themselves open and vulnerable to the learning and to taking on new practices, right? Because at the end of the day, it's all about what we're practicing, right? Like, are we willing to let something go and to let new practices take hold? And I like coaching and I like helping people, but one of the things that surprised me is just how moved I am by people and their courage and their ingenuity, and really how much love there is in that process. Because when I help someone become empowered and open and step into a new way of being, all sorts of possibilities open up for them, right? Like the whole world opens up for them, like learning. There's a whole other level of possibility of learning. And that means that I've just unleashed someone to just be an agent for good in the world. And so the reward of coaching was even greater than I thought it was. And then also, I'm lucky, right? I get to work with a lot of people who are already high performing. So when they figure something out and they get something that works, boy, they move with it quickly. And so I'm often amazed that someone like, hey, here's how to have this skillful conversation with this woman, the only woman on your team, and then he takes that and he figures out how to apply those principles to other difficult conversations. It's just people's ability to learn and take hold once they figure something out is just incredible, which, is one of the things that gives me hope. Hope that when we do make ourselves vulnerable and we want to learn that we can do incredible things.
Amazing, Ben. Yeah, I love that. So why do you think that this subject is important? Why do you think coaching in general is important?
I think, well, that's an interesting question. Why is coaching important? I mean, my kind of off the cuff answer is, people are overworked. They're under-resourced. We live in a consumer society that really wants us to take external solutions for solving our satisfaction and our intimacy needs when they're really internal solutions that need to be happening. And that people are fairly numb and overworked and pretty exhausted. And it's really hard from that place, to learn and to find new ways of being. And so it really takes a coach to get people to do the work, to do the change, because companies aren't, companies are providing coaching and some training, which is great, but the rest of society doesn't empower people to really do this on their own. And unless you're incredibly privileged, right? If you're incredibly privileged, you can have the therapist, you can have the coach, you can go to your chiropractor, you can get the massage, right? I'm just saying, I'm talking to, I'd say a good third of the executives I work with, they have sleeping problems. I mean, let's talk about some fundamental things. Regardless of which, spiritual tradition you look back on in the last 5,000 years, they're all going to say having a good diet, exercise, fitness, and sleep are fundamental. And it's amazing how many folks I have to work with to get that baseline in their life, because they want to point to some other issues. And I'm like, until you have those things as three things as a baseline in your life, it's really hard to discern what the issues are. Right? Like that we need coaches to actually help us get a baseline of resilience, so then we can tackle some of the deeper and more challenging parts of our nervous system, our personality. It's hard. It's hard to take on major behavior change if you don't feel resilient.
100%. Yeah.
If you're overwhelmed. I'm working with people. They're making a ton of money. They have all the resources in the world, and they have the best title, and they're still on a conveyor belt.
There's no like inner peace, right? There's no like kind of the calmness within. It's interesting as my perspective too, because a lot of people have sleeping issues or can't fall asleep or can't stay asleep, and it's interesting because like there was a period in my life where I experienced that very short period, like a 6-month period, and to me it's just such a clear indicator that there's something that's out of alignment, and there was something out of alignment in my life when that happened, and so I'm always like, wow, instead of just numbing it or thinking that it's an acceptable way to live, let's go investigate like what's going on, what's out of alignment. Like it's something I feel like the soul is communicating to you, and so.
So for you, it wasn't really about your daily practices, right? I mean, if you're drinking 5 cups of coffee a day and you're having trouble
that's
sleeping,
like a very obvious input output,
But for you, it was like something in your heart or something. Yeah, it's like you said, something in your soul needed to get dealt with. I see.
It's just an interesting thing where I feel like, because I used to be in that corporate grind, 7 years ago or so, and now I just wouldn't trade my inner peace for anything. There's just some inner contentment that I think we all strive to be in this life. And
you've figured out a nice life, I will tell you that. I mean, in meeting you, you were just happy, you were loose, doing so many interesting things. A lot of my clients, they're looking to find that. They're looking to find, what am I passionate about? Can I make a living with it? Can all those things line up for me? So, I don't know you very well, but you've figured something out.
Thanks, Ben. I feel like I've made a promise that like my life would always be a celebration, and, I'm not going to settle for anything less. So that's every day is a celebration.
That's a great declaration.
It's fun. It's fun. Okay, so Ben, what do you want to tell our listeners about your kind of main takeaway, your main call to action for folks listening? What's kind of the piece of advice that you want to give them?
Well, a couple things. One is, my definition of leadership is that anybody can be leading. Right. And I mean, if you're setting direction, wherever you are right now, if whatever you're doing, you're having to set direction, the vision, the strategy, what's next, you're having to actually execute, get stuff done. And you have to manage relationships around you in order for things to get done. You're leading. So like, don't think that leading is like, you got to have a corner office. You had to be born into a certain class or go to a certain college, right? So many people are leading and they don't empower themselves to know they're leading, and therefore they don't know that they could get some more support, right? They could get some more support, and they could get that these are learned skills, right? It's not something that you're innately born with, right? All these things require support. And anyways, so I just that people hear that and they might recognize themselves and go, wow, I am leading. And I could get some support because I want to lead better and I want to feel more satisfied doing it.
Yeah.
So that's what I'd leave it with. And if I have a very simple website, it's benschick.com, and I'm always open to having conversations with people to check in. I give a free 30-minute session to folks who just want to explore. I work with, high-performing corporate clients, but I also work with nonprofits. I really try to spread out who I work with. It's just part of my value system for I want to contribute to the world.
I love that, Ben. Yeah, and for folks listening, definitely go reach out to Ben. I was just in awe of his philosophy on life and just all the ways and layers I think that you were paying attention to this world, Ben. I was very moved by that, and I feel like anyone would be lucky to work with you. So, and
you're very kind.
Well, and where it's
you're
true.
Very kind.
It's
Listen
true.
to you.
And where again? What's the website that people can navigate to? If you have, or do you want to point people in a direction to connect with you?
Yeah, it's benschick.com, BENSCHICK.com. And there, you can click on contact and reach out.
Okay, great. And we'll leave the link in the show notes so that people can find you easily.
All right.
Okay, awesome. Well, thank you so much for your time, Ben. This was so lovely.
It was really nice being with you.
And for our audience, thanks for joining and for listening. In this episode, we learned about leadership with Ben Schick, and you can tune into Gateways to Awakening, where we host one-on-one conversations with leading experts in wellness, well-being, spirituality, and consciousness. Thanks again. What would you like to see change in your life? And what is the biggest obstacle that you're facing now? I run a 5-week program at the Inner Knowing School for serious individuals who are ready to take the next step in their personal and professional lives. I will personally be coaching a small group of individuals, a number of practical tools and frameworks for creating an intuition practice and for self-mastery. You can find more at theinnerknowingschool.com. I have a master certification in intuition medicine, and I've condensed 10 plus years of experience and research navigating how to harness your energy and intuition in an easy to access live curated course. Now, as someone who's helped countless creatives, entrepreneurs, and many who are just plain stuck, open doors of possibility they never thought existed, I've seen this strategy transform people's inner states and external reality. And the best part is that you'll skyrocket your output and unlock your creative genius. I'll work with you weekly live to overcome your limiting beliefs and show you how to manage your energy instead of your time. I'll teach you how to create clarity, processes, develop your intuition based on some of the top tools and frameworks that I've developed. And you'll get access to guided meditations and visualizations not available anywhere else. This method is so effective that even if you don't have that much time, or if you think that you might not be ready, this will work for you. You can check out the link in the show notes to join the waiting list, and you can check out what past clients had to say about the program. Wishing you all many blessings ahead.